The year of mass layoffs. I lost my job. My son fell gravely ill, with no money for treatment. He ended up mentally impaired. I cursed the heavens for being so cruel to those already suffering. But in the end, I accepted my fate and stumbled through life with my wife, Willow. I never expected that one day, while cleaning out my wardrobe, I would come across an old lottery ticket, one that my wife had won decades ago, worth 30,000 yuan, but in her diary, she had written, "The 30,000 yuan from the lottery goes to my dearest husband, Makoto." The sky collapsed around me, because my name isn't Makoto. Makoto was our team leader at the factory. In the heat of an argument, she caught me off guard and killed me. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the time before the mass layoffs even began. Chapter 1. What is this? Willow, tell me, what the hell is this? You even called him your husband. Do you two have no shame at all? I threw the lottery stub and diary at Willow's feet, my face twisted in rage, demanding an explanation. 30,000 yuan, back then. That amount could have changed our entire family's fate, but she gave it away without a word. Willow's face flickered with panic, but not because I had discovered the truth. She was only worried I would damage her precious belongings. She snatched them up carefully, treating them like treasures, and said, "Why are you rummaging through my things? Besides, it was so long ago. We've been living just fine. What's the point of bringing it up now?" My anger boiled over. What's the point? Was I the one being petty? Back then, our son was critically ill. We had both lost our jobs. I was working myself to the bone doing odd jobs just to survive, while she gave all that money to that bastard Makoto and watched our son suffer without a second thought. What kind of mother does that? Later, my son barely clung to life multiple times. I was desperate. Out of options, I decided to go to Makoto and beg him for help, thinking that since our family had once helped him, he might lend us something in return. But what did Willow say? Makoto is struggling too. His wife died in childbirth, and he's drowning in debt. How could he possibly have any money to lend? Maybe our son was just meant to have this fate. Bullshit. If Willow had brought that money back home, my son wouldn't have suffered, wouldn't have ended up like that. It was never about fate, it was about her selfishness. I roared, "Willow, do you think I don't know what's going on in that head of yours? You really believe he'd marry you even if he got divorced 100 times? I swear, I'm going straight to Makoto. I want to see how thick his damn skin must be, living his whole life in comfort off my family's money. Doesn't he fear that when he dies and faces judgment in the underworld, the king of hell will make him pay it all back in his next life?" When I was young, my whole world revolved around Willow. She kept her own money for herself, while my salary covered our expenses. Even the money for that lottery ticket, she asked me for it, and yet, when she won, she didn't bring a single cent back home. Makoto had seen my son suffering in the hospital countless times. He watched him slowly lose himself to his illness, and yet, he had no problem using that 30,000 yuan to live a comfortable life. To make it worse, every time he visited with some fruit or tonics, I was foolish enough to be grateful, thinking he was a good friend. Turns out, the real fool was me. I was the biggest joke of all. Willow shrieked, "You're not going. George, you hear me? Stop right there. I gave that money to Makoto willingly. Do you really have to ruin his life over this? Do you have no heart? How did I end up marrying someone like you? Like hell." I was going to listen. I turned to storm out the door, but then, Willow, this so-called delicate, fragile woman, suddenly lunged at me and shoved me hard. I wasn't prepared. My head slammed against the ground. For a moment, my mind went completely blank. The only thing I could see was my mentally impaired son pushing past Willow, sobbing as he reached for me. Then everything went dark, and the next thing I heard was, "George, it's just a little money to help Makoto. Why are you being so stingy?" I snapped my head up. In front of me stood Willow, decades younger, the enamel water jug, the communal dormitory, the familiar clothes. I had come back to the very beginning. Willow continued, "George, we're both factory workers with stable jobs. Makoto's wife died in childbirth, and he's drowning in debt. What's the big deal if you lend him a little money? Don't be so selfish." All right, it all came flooding back. In my past life, this was when Makoto's wife had just passed away. He'd climbed to the rooftop of the factory, threatening to jump. Everyone had talked him down, saying they'd pool some money together to help him through this hardship. That's why Willow came back to ask me to lend him some money. I had been a fool. I actually believed Makoto was suicidal. I actually believed Willow's so-called kindness, and I handed over the money. And from that moment on, my family's suffering began. Even when I died, I never got that money back. Willow was still nagging, but the next second, slap, I raised my hand and smacked her across the face. It felt good. She was still in shock when I slapped her again, left and right, one after the other. "Divorce, you shameless, disgusting woman. How dare you crawl into another man's bed while married to me? Marrying you was the worst damn mistake of my life. Makoto wants money. Fine, Let him come ask me himself. Since when does a man send another man's wife to beg her husband for money to support him? The walls in these old buildings had terrible soundproofing, but I had nothing to hide. Willow, on the other hand, panicked. She lunged at me, trying to cover my mouth. Shut up. What are you saying? You're ruining my reputation. Reputation. After everything, she still cared about that. I shoved her away with a kick to the stomach, sending her sprawling onto the ground. I grabbed a fistful of her hair and slapped her again. The sound crisp and sharp. She curled up, clutching her face, too afraid to move. I glared down at her and spat. Willow, divorce. I want a divorce. I'm done with you. Chapter 2. Willow stared at me in utter disbelief. George, you want a divorce? Over something so trivial? If I had known you were this petty and jealous, I never would have agreed to marry you. I sneered inwardly. That weak attempt at guilt-tripping me didn't even sting as much as the words of the heartless factory bosses. With someone like her, talking was useless. The only way to shut her up was through action, until she no longer dared to open her mouth. I didn't reply. I simply continued serving her a Wong-style beating, slap after slap. If nothing else, she was truly devoted to Makoto. Even now, after everything, she was still trying to defend him. She kept begging me not to ruin his reputation, to lend him the money. No wonder this frail little woman had been capable of killing me in my past life, all for Makoto's sake. I didn't care what she said. Every time she tried to manipulate me or argue back, I gave her another slap. I wanted to see what would break first, her stubborn mouth or my hand. Eventually, she caught on. She finally shut up, but she glared at me with pure resentment. At last, I let her go and slumped onto the floor, panting. Her voice trembled. George, you've hit me enough. Just stop. I cut her off. I'm done hitting you. Now, let's talk about the divorce. Our son stays with me. The house was assigned to me by the factory, so you pack your things and leave. Willow scrambled to her feet, her face twisting with outrage. George, you're not only divorcing me, but you also want me to leave with nothing. I never knew you were so heartless. I won't agree. I won't divorce you. Right now. She hadn't gotten involved with Makoto yet. She hadn't won the lottery. And most importantly, our son wasn't sick yet. I had to divorce her. I had to make money. I would never let my son suffer the same fate again. Come to think of it, Willow had never contributed to our household. She blew through every penny of her salary, claiming it all went toward groceries, household items, and miscellaneous expenses, impossible to keep track of. She always said, but in reality, who was the one paying for everything at home? It was me, handing over my entire paycheck. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I landed another slap across her face. Heartless. Sure, I'll be heartless. And you wasteful, shameless woman, who are you to scold me? You live off my money, eat off my money, but if I buy a pack of cigarettes, you throw a fit. Meanwhile, I have no right to ask where your money goes. Do you even have any shame? Who the hell do you think you are to say no to this divorce? I stepped forward, pressing on, my voice filled with fury. Fine, if you won't agree. Let's take this to your factory. Let's ask your co-workers why you show up dressed to the nines every day. Let's find out exactly where all your money has been going. Maybe the whole time I've been the fool keeping you fed while you've been spending your salary on some pretty boy. This era wasn't like later times. Everyone in the factory knew exactly how much their co-workers earned. We all lived in the same building. The neighbors all knew each other's business. If I made a scene and an investigation started, Willow wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. And in this time, cheating, whether by a man or a woman, was disgraceful. If word got out, her chances at any factory awards or promotions would go up in smoke, and everyone who had been competing for those spots would hate her for it. I knew the mass layoffs were coming, but Willow didn't. As soon as she heard I was taking this to the factory, she wilted like a frostbitten eggplant. Pathetically, she pleaded, George, I swear, there's nothing between me and Makoto. Even if you want a divorce, at least think about our child. Do you really think he wants his parents to separate? I hesitated. Before my son, David, fell ill, he had been deeply attached to his mother, and after his illness, he understood nothing. I could walk away from this marriage without a second thought, but David, could he really bear it? Seeing my hesitation, Willow pressed her advantage. George, a child needs his mother. You can't just. Before Willow could finish, a small voice cut through her words. Chapter 3. Dad, if you divorce Mom, I want to go with you. David had appeared at the doorway without us noticing. He ran up to me, clutched onto my clothes, and repeated himself, I want to live with Dad. Dad, please divorce Mom. The moment those words left his mouth, Willow raised her hand and slapped him hard across the face. A bright red handprint swelled up on his little cheek, but his eyes remained unwavering. Tears welled up in Willow's eyes. You ungrateful brat, what did I ever do to you? How could you want your father to divorce me? I immediately pulled David behind me and shoved Willow to the ground. I roared, who the hell do you think you are to lay a hand on my son? Listen to me, Willow, if you ever dare hit him again, I won't lay a finger on you. I won't even yell at you. But first thing tomorrow, I'll make sure everyone in the factory knows about you and Makoto's dirty little secret." Her voice trembled. "I have nothing to say to a man who beats his wife." Pathetic. We had been married for decades. I knew exactly what she was thinking. She wanted to run away and avoid dealing with this. Not a chance. I chuckled. "Go ahead, Willow. Step out that door the moment you do. I'm heading straight to Jenny next door for a little chat. I guarantee by morning, every single person in the factory will know all about you two filthy lovebirds." Jenny was infamous for her big mouth. Anything she knew, the whole world knew. Sure enough, after I sent David back to his room, Willow was still frozen in place. She didn't dare leave. I spoke coldly. "Tomorrow, we're finalizing the divorce." "Exactly as I said. I've already spared you some dignity. If you don't agree, I'll make sure things get ugly." It wasn't that I didn't want to drag out every last detail about our finances and leave her with nothing, but I had more urgent matters to handle. I couldn't afford to waste time. I needed to divorce Willow as soon as possible. I had to go buy that lottery ticket. David's illness and the impending wave of mass layoffs, they had been suffocating weights on my chest for too long. Willow lowered her head. She still couldn't understand how something as simple as lending a little money to Makoto had escalated into a divorce. But my stance was firm, with no other option. She finally nodded. That night, I forced her to pack her things. She returned the bride price I had paid for her. She took half of whatever household items she had brought in. The next morning, we went straight to the civil affairs office. At this time, divorce was still a simple process. As long as both parties agreed and there were no disputes over property, it could be done in no time. And just like that, I held my divorce certificate in hand. I looked at Willow one last time and said, "Move your things out today. Whether you go back to your parents' house or wherever, I don't care, but you better tell Makoto, if he dares to mess with me again, I'll expose everything." Willow opened her mouth, as if wanting to say something, but I was already gone. I sprinted straight to the lottery stall. When I confirmed that the winning lottery ticket was indeed among today's batch, I didn't hesitate. I slammed down most of my paycheck onto the table and declared, "Boss, I just got divorced. I'm buying every single lottery ticket here today." The stall owner and the onlookers all turned to gape at me in shock. I didn't care. Under everyone's watchful eyes, I swept up the entire stack of tickets. "I just got divorced," I repeated, voice steady. "All assets have been settled. No one's going to come after me for this. I'm celebrating. I'm buying them all." Back in these days, there were no security cameras, but that was exactly the point. By making this a public spectacle, I was ensuring that every person here would remember it, because in the future, they would all serve as my witnesses. Chapter 4. By the time I returned to the factory, it was already afternoon. I had asked Jenny to request leave for me in the morning, making no effort to hide the reason. I was getting a divorce. As I walked in, many co-workers greeted me. Most of them were just curious, but no one dared to ask outright. Then Makoto stepped forward. "George, I heard you divorced Willow. Look, every couple has their rough patches. You're just too stubborn, too rigid. When dealing with a woman, you need to be more emotional and less rational. Being this controlling and nitpicky, what woman would want to stay with you?" Every word out of his mouth was trying to pin the blame for the divorce on me. Oh, I hadn't even come to settle things with him yet, and here he was, stepping up on his own. I rolled up my sleeves, ready to beat the hell out of him. But before I could, a woman from the factory stepped in first. She snapped, "Makoto, what do you mean by that? Are you saying that we women are unreasonable? That's a sexist, backward mindset, and you should be ashamed." Then another co-worker, a burly man, added, "Exactly, and George is one of the most honest, hard-working men here. If there's a problem, it sure as hell isn't with him, it's with Willow." A third worker chimed in, "You don't even know the details, so why are you so quick to throw accusations? Makoto, you have a terrible way with words." I looked at the co-workers speaking up for me, and suddenly, my eyes burned with emotion. In my past life, when the layoffs came, everyone lost their jobs. I was so consumed with scraping together medical expenses for David that I barely had the energy to care about these relationships. But now these people were standing up for me. For the first time, it truly felt like I had been given a second chance at life. Makoto's face turned pale. He furrowed his brows, retreating step by step like a cornered rat. He stammered, I was just trying to help. I only wanted to give him some advice." "You guys are overreacting. Look at that." I had seen this pathetic act for decades already. It didn't work on me anymore. I stepped forward, fixing Makoto with a deadly glare. My jaw tightened as I spat. "You want to know why Willow and I got divorced? Fine, let me tell you, Makoto." But before I could finish, a voice interrupted me. "I'm sorry." Willow had run over, panting. She avoided my gaze and quickly blurted out, "It was just that George and I weren't a good match, that's all." This was her so-called lack of feelings for Makoto. I let out a cold laugh and dropped the argument, but Makoto seized the moment. He straightened up, righteous and indignant. Willow, why are you covering for him? Just because you wanted to do a good deed. George divorced you over money. George. Even great leaders have said we should have a spirit of selflessness. We should help others. I didn't even look at Willow anymore. I charged forward and punched Makoto square in the face. Before he could recover, I kicked his knee, sending him crumbling to the ground. This time, he was in too much pain to utter another word. I sneered. Willow, doing a good deed. Oh, so taking my money and giving it to you is a good deed now. Everyone here, tell me, what kind of wife takes her husband's money and spends it on another man? The entire factory erupted into chaos. Gasps filled the air as everyone turned to Willow, their gazes filled with shock, judgment, and disdain. Makoto tried to say something, maybe to explain, maybe to weasel his way out of it, but I wasn't done. I rolled up my sleeves further and went after him again. I shouted angrily, Makoto, enjoying your life as a kept man? Huh? Living off a woman and now trying to mess with me? Do you really think I'll just sit back and take it? Chapter 5. Because of the fight, Makoto, Willow, and I were all summoned to the office. The factory director glared at us, his voice stern. Fighting during work hours? What do you three think you're doing? Makoto's face was a mess of bruises and swelling. His pained expression was so pathetic it was almost comical. I lowered my head and admitted to disrupting the workplace, but I refused to apologize for hitting Makoto. The director had already heard the full story from the other workers. Because of that, he couldn't come down too hard on me. He sighed heavily. You three hold iron rice bowl jobs, stable, respected positions. Do you know how many people envy you? And now, just when we're about to evaluate for promotions, you pull this nonsense. What do you want me to say? He slammed his palm against the desk. The water in the enamel thermos shook and splashed onto the surface. Makoto immediately seized the opportunity to complain. Director, look at my face. He beat me up so badly. You can't just let this slide. George is a bully. He has to apologize and pay for my medical expenses. The director's face darkened. What? Makoto, after everything you've done, you have the audacity to demand compensation. You ruined the factory's reputation. And you, George, you're hot-tempered and reckless. You two are both problems. There will be consequences. With that, he made his decision. George, you'll have half a month's wages deducted. Willow and Makoto, 2 months' wages deducted. Why? The two of them spoke in unison, one out of worry, the other out of indignation. The director narrowed his eyes. Why? Because if word about your little scandal spreads, it'll reflect poorly on all of us. His tone was firm. This wasn't up for discussion. But I didn't have time to waste. No one here knew it yet, but in just 1 month, this factory, seemingly thriving, would be merged with another. A massive wave of layoffs would follow, and I would be one of the workers let go. More importantly, in 2 weeks, David would start showing symptoms of his illness. I had come here today planning to resign anyway. I needed to cash in the lottery ticket and take David to get medical treatment. In my past life, the doctors had told me David's illness was curable, but the local hospitals didn't have the necessary resources. Back then, I could barely scrape together enough for basic treatment, let alone afford a full cure. But this time, I had a chance, and I wasn't going to let my son suffer another lifetime. I couldn't keep taking leave. Resigning was the only option. So I said, Director, if they're unhappy with the punishment, why don't you just fire all 3 of us? I'll fully cooperate. If I was leaving, I was taking these 2 down with me. Makoto and Willow's faces turned ghostly pale. They looked at me like I had lost my mind. Even the director frowned disapprovingly. George, don't act on impulse. You need to think things through. This is a stable job. Where else will you find another one like it? Look, how about this? The money deducted from their wages will be given to you as compensation. I shook my head. I turned and glared at Willow and Makoto with pure hatred. Director, I can't work under the same roof as these 2 anymore. I came here today specifically to resign. I'll also move out of the factory housing. I just need a few days to sort things out. Seeing that I couldn't be swayed, the director let out a heavy sigh. Fine, collect your last paycheck. He paused before adding, but George, Willow and Makoto will stay. Everyone is struggling. I nodded. I had no intention of pushing further. If they were fired, Willow's parents would come after me for custody of David. My own parents would pressure me to reconcile with her, and David didn't have time to wait. After today, those 2 wouldn't have an easy time in the factory. Their reputations were already ruined. Besides, when you have nothing to lose, you have no fear. They, on the other hand, still needed this job, and they wouldn't dare cross me again. Chapter 6. I held David's small hand tightly and said, David, don't be afraid. Dad will always be with you. Okay. I straightened my back. Right now, seeing a doctor was no easy task. Seeking treatment in another province required referral papers and a mountain of procedures. David hadn't shown symptoms yet. If the hospital failed to diagnose anything, it would just waste more time. My mind was in chaos, but David's tiny hand gripped mine firmly. Daddy, I'm not afraid. Now that Mommy's gone, you're safe, he said. I froze and looked down at him in shock. He grinned widely and added, I had a dream. Mommy pushed you down, and you bled a lot. Mommy is bad. I don't want her. I only want Daddy. David knew. Could it be? Had David also been reborn? Maybe. To him, everything that happened in our past life was just a nightmare. I nodded firmly. Yes, it was just a dream. We don't need her. To be safe, I made an appointment with the same doctor from my previous life. After a series of tests, the doctor sat across from me with a grave expression. It's a good thing you came early. Your son hasn't developed symptoms yet. But there's bad news. Our facilities here can't treat his condition. You'll have to go to a city. A city. That meant expensive medical bills, travel costs, and accommodation expenses. Some people lived their entire lives without ever leaving their province. And now, I had to take David to a city for treatment. The doctor sighed, but I felt like everything had been worth it. As long as there was hope, as long as David could be cured, that was enough. I said, Doctor, we'll go to a city. Please help us with the referral paperwork. Thank you. The doctor hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He gave me detailed instructions on what to bring and what to watch out for at the hospital in a city. Every penny had to be spent wisely. When we left the hospital, I took David home to prepare for the trip. Soon, word spread throughout the neighborhood. David was sick, and I was taking him to a city for treatment. Neighbors came by, some bringing eggs, others even offering money. I thanked them all sincerely. Then, I scratched off all my lottery tickets and took them to the redemption center. In addition to the 30,000 I already knew about, I had won even more money. When I casually mentioned it, the news spread through the entire alley like wildfire. After all, at this time, even people with 10,000 yuan were considered wealthy. Sure enough, that very night, bang bang bang, there was a loud knock on my door. I opened it to see Willow. She pressed her lips together, silent. Just as I was about to shut the door in her face, a foot suddenly wedged into the doorway. Brother Wang, I heard you won a few tens of thousands in the lottery. Congratulations. Makoto forced his way forward, smiling as if we were lifelong friends. All his past hostility had vanished. Grinning shamelessly, he continued, Brother Wang, you're not being very fair. Even though you're divorced, half of that lottery money still belongs to Willow. I scoffed. His eyes were practically glowing with greed. Did he really think I didn't know what he was after? If Willow got the money, it would go straight into his hands. Leaning against the doorframe, I blocked them from entering and raised my voice for the whole neighborhood to hear. Willow, is that money yours? Let's ask the neighbors. Everyone knows David is sick, but you, his mother, didn't even ask about him. And now you show up to steal your son's life-saving money. Do you even deserve to be called a mother? Willow avoided my gaze. Her eyes cast downward. In a small voice, she murmured, How much money do you really need for medical expenses? George, we bought that ticket before we divorced. Half of the winnings belong to me. I almost laughed out loud in disbelief. Willow had completely thrown away any last shred of shame. Chapter 7. The next moment, Makoto's mother arrived. She put on a fake, elderly charm, playing the wise old woman. Young man, listen to me. A couple may be divorced, but 100 days of marriage still carries deep ties. You can't possibly spend all that money alone. So why not give your wife half? Even if you can't be husband and wife, you can still be friends. How amusing. The son was shameless, and the mother was just as thick-skinned. Makoto chimed in, Brother Wang, since you're so well off now, why not lend me some money? Or better yet, just give Willow her half, and she can lend it to me. With that, the three of them tried to squeeze into my house. I blocked the entrance. Inside, David had heard the commotion and came out to help me. As I held the door, I saw our neighbors peeking out of their homes. I shot David a look. David was sharp. Without missing a beat, he plopped onto the ground and started wailing. Bad people. You're all bad people. You're trying to steal Daddy's money. Mommy, I don't want to die. Please don't take my life-saving money. Mommy, please. I don't want to die. His voice was piercing, filled with desperation and terror. And just like that, people poured out of their homes to see what was going on. I shoved Makoto's mother, making her stumble back. Makoto, panicking, tried to push me in return, but before he could even lay a finger on me, I collapsed onto the ground myself, trembling. This era was different. People weren't used to seeing this kind of scene. Instantly, a crowd formed. Shouts of outrage erupted. Willow, Makoto, what the hell are you doing? Bringing your lover here to beat up your own husband and son? Even tigers don't eat their own cubs. How can you call yourself human? This is all about money, isn't it? Look at these two, thick as thieves. They don't even care about their own flesh and blood. We should report them for immoral conduct. George, David, don't be afraid. We're all here. No one is going to take your money. I smirked. Now they were completely ruined. With so many people watching, the three of them immediately switched tactics. trying to reason their way out of it. But their words all boiled down to one thing: money. What they didn't realize was that when I bought the lottery tickets, I had deliberately made sure everyone saw my divorce certificate. My finances were clearly separated. Thanks to my big spender act that day, the stall owner had a strong impression of me. Everyone who heard about my winnings knew that I bought the tickets after the divorce, with my own money. Not even a single cent belonged to Willow. I sneered. Willow, I thought you simply betrayed me. But now I see, you're willing to sacrifice even your own son's life for money. I stood up and slapped Willow across the face, then again, and again. Pa, pa, pa. This time, I wasn't acting. David had suffered so much in his past life, and at the end of the day, it was my own weakness that had failed him. Even when Willow pushed me to my death, my last thoughts had been about him. What would happen to my son if I died? People say that a child is a mother's heart and soul, but Willow, she didn't care about her own son. She was willing to take his life-saving money and hand it to another man. I would never understand why. The memory of David being mocked, bullied, and isolated in our past life burned in my mind. I lost control. I hit her harder. The onlookers watched, their expressions dark with fury. Not one person stepped in to help her, because if they dared to fight back, the crowd would tear them apart. Then, Makoto made a fatal mistake. Through gritted teeth, he sneered, spending 30,000 on a kid's treatment, as if that'll cure him. You might as well just have another one. The moment those words reached my ears, something inside me snapped. Makoto had just tried to run, but I had already heard everything. My entire body shook with rage. I dropped Willow immediately and lunged at Makoto. I wrapped my arm around his throat, choking him. His eyes rolled back as he struggled, his hands clawing at my arms. I tightened my grip. You worthless piece of garbage, I roared. You can have Willow, this pathetic excuse of a woman, but you will not lay a finger on my son's life-saving money. Anyone who tries to block my son from getting treatment, anyone who dares steal his money, I will kill them. You have such a filthy mouth. Fine, then never speak again. Makoto gasped and gagged, his face turning purple. Chapter 8. The moment the neighbors pulled me back, I let go of Makoto. He gasped for air, clutching his throat as Willow supported him. The two of them stumbled away, limping as they fled. I bid farewell to the neighbors and set off with David. David, still so small, leaned against me. Every time I looked down at him, he would flash me a bright smile, far too understanding for his age. It was heartbreaking. After several days on the train, we finally arrived in a city. David was successfully admitted to the hospital, and only then did half the weight on my chest lift. When the test results came back, the doctor confirmed that surgery was possible, and David could be cured. I couldn't hold back my tears. I grasped David's little hand and said, David, be good. Okay, Dad has to go out and make money, so don't run around. After making sure David was settled, I took out some money and asked a neighboring patient's family to keep an eye on him while I was away. Then, I left the hospital. On the train ride here, I overheard conversations about private businesses starting to emerge in big cities like a city. I had no special abilities, no cheat codes, only knowledge of the future, and my target, the largest clothing wholesale market in a city. I couldn't write music like in those time travel stories. The stock market hadn't even been piloted yet, and even when it did, I had never paid attention to it in my past life. Most importantly, my funds were limited. Clothing was an industry with an entry cost I could afford. Plus, after years of watching trends, I had a decent grasp of fashion's direction. If I could secure a city's latest styles at wholesale prices, then bring them back home where travel was still difficult, the clothes would still be in fashion when they arrived. But reality wasn't as easy as the novels made it seem. I had to visit the market countless times before I finally got a chance to test the waters. Once I built up demand, I secured a contract. During David's hospital stay, I worked tirelessly, sketching designs day and night. The moment I established one connection, I used it to open more doors. I seized every opportunity. I had to. David was still young, his treatment was timely, and finally, after over a month in the hospital, he was discharged. The medical bills had taken a chunk of my money, but I had also made a profit. Every day, I lugged massive bags of clothes through the streets, drawing attention. To avoid unnecessary trouble, I hired a reliable truck driver through a local clothing company to handle long-term deliveries. Back home, the factory had already been merged, and our old building had been reclaimed. I took David straight to buy a house. The future city center wasn't much yet, so the prices were cheap. I clenched my teeth and bought a commercial property too, not outright, but on a loan. Before long, my old co-workers and neighbors heard I was back. Even though they had lost their jobs, they still brought whatever little they could to visit David. I asked, Jenny, have you found a job yet? My heart burned with an idea. Selling clothes alone wouldn't be easy, but I had worked with these people for years. I knew their capabilities and character better than anyone. If I could hire them, Not only would I have reliable workers, but I could repay them for their kindness. Jenny sighed and shook her head. It's not that easy, George. Things are tough right now. I smiled. Jenny, come work for me. Bring your son and daughter-in-law too. I'll pay you this much. I held up a number, and Jenny's jaw dropped. Before she could refuse, I continued. Jenny, I rented a store. My stock will arrive in a few days. I'm not just giving you free money. I need your son to handle deliveries, your daughter-in-law to be a model, and you to take her out and show off the clothes. If anyone asks, tell them where to find our shop. I trust your mouth. No matter how stylish the clothes were, they still needed promotion. And Jenny's mouth, the moment she told people the clothes came from a city, she could hype them up like they were the finest treasures. Within a few days, my tiny, unknown store had become the hottest shop in town. Chapter 9. With my shop thriving, I expanded. I submitted my formal wear designs to a manufacturer under the condition that they allow me to open a branch store under my name and synchronize all clothing shipments to me. I knew that soon others would open clothing shops as well, but my goal, use a city's reputation to cement my first mover advantage. With the business growing, I hired even more of my former co-workers, accountants, models, security guards. Yuan clothing had become a well-known brand in town, and my heart, it was finally at peace. My son, David, only needed to live a happy, healthy life, but as the saying goes, the more famous a pig, the more likely it is to get slaughtered. Willow's parents caught wind of my success and came knocking, with Willow in tow. Lou's mother put on her best fake, motherly smile and cooed. George, we never even knew about your divorce. I always knew you were a good son-in-law, destined for great things. No matter what Willow did, she was still your first wife. You can't abandon the woman who stood by you when you were poor, right? Her greedy eyes scanned the clothing racks as her hands fondled the fabric. She continued, I already scolded Willow for her mistakes. Come on now, why don't you two just go and get remarried? Life will be wonderful again. Ha, wishful thinking. Lou's father cleared his throat, glancing at my expression. Seeing that I wasn't convinced, he shifted tactics. George, even if you don't want Willow back, David still needs his mother. How about this? Just arrange jobs for us. That way, Willow can stay close to David and raise him properly. Oh. Did they think that by starting with a small request, I'd eventually agree to the big one? I raised an eyebrow and asked, and what kind of jobs were you thinking? Lou's mother's face lit up with excitement. Even Willow perked up at the thought. She immediately laid out her demands. Well, I should get the same salary as Jenny, your father-in-law too. As for Willow, she should manage your accounts. After all, it's such a big business. You can't just trust outsiders, right? Willow is David's mother. Who else would guard your fortune better than her? I almost laughed. Really? Jenny had been with me since day one. She was my top salesperson, practically the face of my brand, and they thought they deserved the same salary. And they wanted to manage my money. What kind of delusional fantasy was this? I chuckled. You can have janitor jobs, manager. Out of the question. Take it or leave it. Willow's head snapped up. George, they're my parents. You stole my $30,000, and I didn't even say anything. Isn't it only right for you to take care of them? And besides, David isn't even sick. Why are you still holding grudges? Ah, so now she was back to claiming the money was hers. Looking at her younger self, I feel like giving her a slap. Seeing her old, I feel even more like unleashing 18 styles of Chinese kung fu on her. Between us lay a life and death grudge. That wasn't something a few words could erase. I frowned. Willow, are you insane? You dare to curse David to become sick again? What kind of shameless, two-timing tramp are you? Around us, my employees, our former neighbors, watched with strange expressions. After all, everyone here knew the truth. Willow had never touched a cent of that $30,000. How was it hers? And David, he was perfectly fine. When had he ever been sick? She was spouting nonsense. With no argument left and no numbers on their side, Willow and her parents slunk away in humiliation. But I wasn't stupid. My business had been booming for a while now. Why had they only just shown up now? I had someone look into it, and sure enough, I found something. After our divorce, Willow had gotten together with Makoto. The two had gone to the hospital together before meeting each other's parents. It was obvious. Either they wanted my money, or Willow was pregnant with Makoto's child and looking for a fool to raise it. If this attempt failed, they would try again. Well, since they were so madly in love, I would make sure they were tied together forever. With money, anything was possible. After days of surveillance, I finally caught them alone together. A single fire didn't burn the house down, but it did burn their reputation to the ground. Willow tried to cover her face, but she couldn't hide her bare body. Makoto was in just as miserable a state. I clapped mockingly. Well, isn't this my ex-wife? Just a few weeks ago, you were begging me to take you back, and now you've already found a new man, a divorced woman and a lifelong bachelor. How perfect. Congratulations. Willow's face froze. This sealed their fate. Once their relationship became official, there was no way she could come crawling back to me or steal my money. Last life, I had suffered. David had suffered. But this time, she could rot with that freeloader Makoto and raise his child. I was going to enjoy this show. Willow panicked. She grabbed my arm, pleading, "No, George, please, believe me. Makoto got me drunk and took advantage of me. I was confused. I only love you. I am your wife, David's mother. Please don't leave me." Makoto's face twisted. He was a lifelong bachelor. If Willow left, he'd lose everything. He immediately pulled her back and shouted, "Willow, how dare you say that? You're already pregnant with my child. What do you mean? I took advantage of you. Don't try to push the blame onto me." Willow's eyes widened in horror. She struggled desperately, trying to break free of Makoto's grip, but in the chaos, she lost her balance. She fell to the ground. "Aya!" Willow screamed. Her hands clutched at her stomach. "My baby. My stomach, it hurts." Chapter 10. Willow was rushed to the hospital. The baby was gone. At the police station, the Liu family and Ito family, Makoto's side, got into a full-blown brawl. Liu's family demanded that Makoto take responsibility and marry Willow, forcing him to legally tie himself to her. And just like that, the two were officially bound together. No wedding. Not even a single piece of celebratory candy was handed out. But I was satisfied. David was healthy. My business grew bigger and bigger. For David's education, I sent him to the best schools. Every year, I made sure he never missed a medical checkup. Who needs both parents when a mother like that was worth less than a pile of money? David was brilliant. His grades were exceptional, and he earned his way into the best universities. Finally, I got to watch him marry the person he loved, something I never even dared to dream of in my past life. As I watched his wedding car drive away, suddenly, a figure dashed into the road. They stumbled, slipped, and fell face first into the pavement, blood spilling onto the street. Someone muttered, "Ignore it, ignore it. That person is a professional scammer. They've cheated so many people out of money." Another hesitated, but that fall looked real. Then, an old man burst out from the crowd, screaming for money. "My wife. You hit my wife. Pay for her medical bills." A classic fraud setup. Without hesitation, I called the police, with dashcam footage and witnesses. It had nothing to do with us, but this time, the scammer wasn't taken away by the police. They were taken away by an ambulance, because this time, the fall was real. As our car slowly drove past, I caught a glimpse of the bloodied figure lying on the ground. It was Willow. David noticed my gaze. "Dad, what are you looking at?" I reached out, adjusting his suit. With a calm smile, I said, "Nothing. I was just thinking, you and your wife must be happy." As for Willow, she had no place in my son's life.